Probably assigned to the lab. It's probably a review of what they've studied.
Well, I'm going to
Maybe not. Don't even go there.
I'll go coffee at home.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that was seems like you know all that by then.
Yeah, you
You just don't know it yet.
I don't study as well as I do when I'm I just don't forget my stuff. Yeah, good afternoon.
Except for my foot.
I saw that last week, and I just.
I have your attention. I'm gonna go ahead and get started, so everybody grab something. Be ready, and let's please stand for the following lesson. If anyone doesn't know the following lesson, you can always come up to the front and stand here and read the following lesson, or say a prayer to yourself. En el nombre del Padre, del Hijo y del Espíritu Santo. Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo, santificado sea tu nombre. Venga a nosotros tu reino. Hágase tu voluntad, así en la tierra como en el cielo. Danos hoy nuestro pan de cada día. Perdona nuestras ofensas, como también nosotros perdonamos a los que nos ofenden. Y no nos dejes caer en tentación, y líbranos del mal. Amen. Great, welcome. Here we go. Now, some of you may remember, I think our instructors are not quite in place yet. Instructors, we're getting started here soon. I just want you to know that you're probably going to be shocked to hear this, but and I usually don't talk about these little things before I get started, but two big things happened this weekend. One thing is that some of us who watched the whole game and stayed until the end know that we almost won. It's an incredible, and then it was an incredible ending. Okay, that's that. Another thing that happened, which is even more important for our instituto, was I was at the 5 o'clock mass on Saturday when two of our participants were there talking about their trip to Mexico. It was an absolutely beautiful presentation, very moving. Lisa was there. And talking about her trip to Tepeyac. Wonderful. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that afterwards I wanted to come up and say something, but there were like 10 people in line, so I said, no, I need to go home and watch more TV. Well, okay, some of you may remember, we started, at the beginning with a discussion of Romance languages, and then after that, long presentation about Rome. And let's go back to that for a second. The three great contributions of Rome to the Iberian Peninsula, let's go review those very briefly. They are
Language, law, and religion.
religion, law, and language. Religion, right, which goes from, as we know, polytheism to Christianity to Roman Trinitarianism, which is, as in the Council of Nicaea, doctrine of the Trinity is foundational for Hispanic Trinitarians. Then you go language, Castilian, that dialect of Vulgar Latin that eventually becomes one of the 10 Romance languages. And then law, Roman law, and we talked about Roman law some. And then the following week, there was a discussion of the fall of Rome, the dispersion of the Roman Empire, and the arrival of the Visigoths on the Iberian Peninsula. And then the discussion also of that invasion from the south, right, from the north of Africa, right, when Berber groups entered with the fire of Islam, they entered the Iberian Peninsula, and in just a few years, they have completely conquered the Iberian Peninsula. They did it in less than 10 years. The reconquest then starts in the north, as I said, and it begins moving south, but it doesn't end until when? 1492, a year that's remembered for many, many things. The conquest of Granada, the end of the Reconquista, the union of the Spanish kingdoms, right? Leon and Castile have already been joined by then. You incorporate Al-Andalus, the south. Aragon has been joined to Castile in the 1470s. That's where you get the Reyes Católicos, whose names are Fernando and Isabel. Fernando and Isabel. They were standing outside of Granada, not far from then you would have had a gate to the city, not missing now, but you would have had a gate to the city. They were standing outside, probably a pretty safe place, but the Catholic kings wanted to be there for the conquest of Granada. And a lot of people don't know this, but standing with him was Christopher Columbus. Cristobal Colon was standing with them there. Why was, I don't usually ask that many questions, but once in a while I do. And as you know, there are always many answers, and not all of them are completely wrong. But if I ask, and it's a very vague question, deliberately, in fact, why was Columbus standing there with the Catholic kings? I want someone to raise their hand. Go ahead. I'm ready. Why was he standing there with them? And those who have been in this institute for a long time, of course, know, and they're too embarrassed to say. But why was he standing there, Libby? Why was Columbus standing there? I mean, there are many reasons. You can give a number of reasons, but why? What's the reason we generally? Yes, if you're going to help her, go ahead and tell us. Go ahead and tell us. Why was he standing there? What?
No, I see.
I bet you someone has an idea. Why was he standing there? Go ahead.
Boy, one meeting.
That's exactly right. Look, he said, would you like to say it again, or should I say it?
No, you.
He probably wanted money. Yes. All right. The story of Columbus, which is an amazing story in itself, is of course connected to a person, I'll go back to the beginning in a minute, but a person who had actually had this idea, and it wasn't just an idea that he came with out of You know, it wasn't just something he imagined one day. No, no, no. Many people had thought for a long time that you could get to the east going west. Now, you know, I know that this is gonna, I'm trying to be funny about this. There are people, and I don't have to, I don't think, if you don't believe me, it's okay, but I can just say this. There are people who still sort of imagine that the earth is flat, you know. And I have heard people say it was because of Columbus that we knew for the first time that actually that the earth was round. Okay, can you imagine? Let me say this, for how long was it known that these planets, of which the earth was one, were these spherical shaped? How long was this known? Yes.
Wasn't it like the Greeks?
Actually, there were Greeks who theorized this. It was known for a long time, but the difference is this. Had anyone really, that's right, had anyone really acted on this theory, that is, had anyone been bold enough to say, you know what, I believe that we can get to the east, and what place in the east where did he want to go? The place was called, in Spanish, Indias. That's where we get the name for Native Americans, Indian, right? Indias, the Indias. He wanted to go there. He knew he was going to pass a place called Cipango. What's Cipango? We know it is Japan. He knew that he would probably pass a place called Cipango. He calculated how far it would be. His calculations were not correct, but his method was correct. The calculation was wrong, but the method was not wrong. He was an amazing person in many ways. I know he's now been so vilified that it's hard to talk about Columbus, but let me say a few words about him. He already at the age of 14 could pilot a pretty good sized boat, a pretty good sized ship. How did people at an earlier time, what were their two guides as they traveled by sea? You got to have the stars. But there's also another thing. You know, you can travel a lot if you can see the shore in the distance. Yes. It's when you get away. It's when you can't see the land anymore. That's when it becomes more complex. How long was his voyage? Who can tell me how long this voyage was? It was thousands of miles. And he was going somewhere no European, to my knowledge, had been. And certainly if someone says, oh yes, we know that so-and-so and so-and-so from Scotland was there, we know this, everyone knows that. No, everyone doesn't know that. No. There are many theories, but Columbus is the one who takes theory to practice. Already by the age of 14, he had already sailed a lot. He studied very, very, very carefully. What would he study? What would he study? What would someone then who was learning to be a sea captain study? Pardon?
Navigation.
Navigation and maps. And maps. Maps, the maps that were available. The maps that were available. He actually owned a copy of a famous work by an Italian named Toscanelli. He had his own copy of Toscanelli. How do we know? Because that copy still exists. The copy of Toscanelli that Columbus studied still exists. Tell me where you think that book is now. It's a trick question. Where do you think that book is now? Can I tell you?
Or you.
It's in, wow. Just a minute, let me sit down a second. Wow, if that book were you. Oh, no, it's, no. That book is actually in Sevilla. That book is in Sevilla, in Spain. Many items that belonged to Columbus are in Sevilla. Now, who can tell me why? Who can tell me why? Many items that belong to Columbus are in Sevilla. Because he lived there, of course. His sons lived there. He had 2 sons. See if these names sound Spanish to you. Diego. You know what Diego is? Diego is Santiago. Santiago, nothing is more Spanish than the name Santiago. Santiago de Compostela, St. James, right? His other son was named Fernando. Fernando and Diego, when they were little boys, he went to a place in Huelva called La Rábida. It was a monastery. And he left them there to study. You remember the story? He left the 2 boys there at La Rábida to study. And he knew that they would be in good hands. He had lived there, La Rábida. It still exists. La Rábida. You can visit La Rábida if you go to Huelva. It's right there. You can see the sea in the distance from La Rábida. He left his sons there so that they could study. He left them in the hands of a couple of priests he knew who would take care of them and make sure that they studied and they learned. He wanted his sons to have good training. How much school do you think Columbus had? We don't know. Don't know. Not much. Not much. A few years, but we do know some things about him though that give us an indication. One, he actually could read Latin. Now, not everybody could read Latin, and not everybody can read Latin now, even after they've had classes. Even after they've had classes at OU. This is actually a monument to Columbus, right there in the harbor in Huelva, not far from La Rábida. I've been to that harbor. At one time, when Columbus's day was celebrated in Europe, this was a huge event. And often a monument would be unveiled. That monument, I believe, was unveiled in 1892. So anyway, there you have it. Columbus wanted his sons to know, to learn, and one of his sons, Fernando, a lot of people don't know this, Fernando de Colón turned out to be the greatest book collector in Europe in the 16th century. The most impressive book collector in Europe. He had a library, which we now call the Columbine Library, named after Columbus, Columbine, that had thousands of books. Books were expensive. Let me ask you a question. Do you think Columbus got rich?
No.
He did not. He did not. In fact, one of the Spanish accounts tells us that when he died, he was, in the words of this biographer, ya olvidado por todos. Let's see if we can translate that. Ya olvidado por todos. He had been forgotten in his own old age. He was forgotten, but his son Fernando was successful. He was a book collector. He lived in Sevilla. We know where he lived. That library, yes. That library, the Columbine Library, this incredible library, was left later to the Cathedral of Sevilla. Some of our participants I know have been to Sevilla. Is that an amazing cathedral or not?
Isn't that Martha's Ferry?
No. Let me talk about that also. Yes, about the tomb of Columbus. We'll come to that, okay? He lived in Sevilla. His son, Fernando, lived there. We imagine that the library would have been something like this, but the problem is we don't really have any kind of drawing, any sort of painting that shows the library with any kind of accuracy. However, Fernando, and this is the son of Columbus, Fernando Colon did something that very few people had ever done. He prepared a catalog of his library. And this is amazing. You can still see the catalog. It was reprinted. Yeah. It's been reprinted several times. And one of the copies of that catalog is held in Los Angeles at the Huntington Library. We know the books that were in the Columbine Library because a catalog was prepared. Columbus's son did this. I remember, I gotta tell you this story. It may sound like I'm way off track here, but it's just a story that I'll never get over. Many years ago, in 1990 to be specific, a professor here at the University of Oklahoma named Eugene Enrico. Some of you may have heard of him, the professor of music. He's a good friend of mine. As a matter of fact, we had lunch today. Eugene Enrico decided that he was going to make a movie, a documentary about Christopher Columbus, and he asked me to be his partner, and I said yes. So I told him about Fernando de Colon. He's never heard of Fernando de Colon. And I said there was actually a diary that the son preserved, right, about Columbus and so on, and he'd never heard of this. So we started, Gene Enrico is a master grant writer, and he got money from what was called then the Quincentenary Commission, which means the 500-year anniversary commission that had an office in New York and had an office in Madrid. So he decided to hit both places. He was going to hit New York, and he did, and he got some money from New York, got some money from the Oklahoma Foundation for the Humanities, he got money from OU. He had wonderful success. And then we went to Spain and spent weeks traveling. Imagine two men in a little Spanish car, traveling all over Spain, all the places that Columbus had been. He was taking pictures just so that he could plan, this documentary, which if you ever want to see it, it's called Music at the Time of 1492, A Portrait in Music at the Time of Columbus. It's an amazing documentary. Even if I helped with it, I can tell you it's an amazing documentary. So we went to Madrid, and I was the presenter because you have to present there in Spanish, and we were presenting our plan and so on. And after about 5 minutes, I'd been talking about Fernando de Colon as one of our principal sources, right? Columbus' son, Fernando. And this woman rudely interrupted me. And she said, No, it's Fernando. It's Cristobal. She basically was saying, you idiot. You don't even know the name of this person, and you come to ask us for money. There's a follow-up that comes later. And I looked at her and I said, humbly, when you ask for money, you have to be kind of humble. You can't say, you idiot! I knew I would come here and be offended by you people. You're the rudest most ignorant in the world. I couldn't say that. This will teach you to keep the camera on me. I said, no. I had to be nice to her, so I said, ay, perdón. Estaba yo hablando del hijo, Fernando de Colón, de la Biblioteca Colombina, the one who had the library. She'd never heard of it. She was one of the people in charge of funding in Madrid.
Wow.
Why would this be the case? How could something like this happen? This is not about Spanish now or about Spain. It's about this. You can be sure that she was connected to the people in charge, the people who had access to all the funds, the people who were there at that time, the cultural people who had gotten in on the ground floor of this new initiative. The Spanish government spent millions of dollars on 1992, the 500-year anniversary. So there she was, and she had no clue that Columbus ever had a son. He sure did. He had a son named Fernando and another one named Diego. When he was a young man, after he had learned and studied all the maps that were available, that he could get his hands on, he went to Portugal. Why would he go to Portugal? This is a question for the group. What's in Portugal? Excellent answer. This is a place with a long history of navigation. Ships. Columbus went there. He learned from a navigator. And he was so close to his teacher that he married his daughter. His wife was Portuguese. And he had 2 sons. You know those sons were Diego and Fernando. He asked for money from the Portuguese crown to see if they would support this idea he had. They said no. He went to other entities. He traveled asking for support. He was turned down over and over again. Finally, he was in Spain. Spain was 1492, the end of the Reconquista. The Catholic kings are in power. He goes to visit a Dominican named Diego de Deza. Diego de Deza lived in Salamanca. He lived at a place called El Convento de San Esteban. The monastery, convento is convent, monastery of Saint Stephen, the first martyr. In fact, if you go to the Convento de San Esteban, there is here an incredible scene carved into the facade of the martyrdom of St. Stephen. He's being stoned. If you look very closely. And I've been to the monasterio, the Convento de San Esteban. And in the Convento de San Esteban, there's a huge room. And that room is the place where Columbus met Diego de Deza. Diego de Deza knew a lot of people. He was a very powerful man. He was a theologian. He taught Thomistic theology at Salamanca. He introduced Thomistic theology at Salamanca. And he was also the confessor of the queen, Isabel la Católica. Diego de Deza was the confessor. He knew the Reyes Católicos personally. This Fray Diego de Deza. He would say years and years later, yo soy el responsable de todo esto, de todos estos viajes. Yo soy el responsable. What does that mean? I am the one responsible for all of these travels, all these journeys, all these voyages. He convinced Isabel la Católica, maybe you should listen to this man. He has this incredible idea. He says that he can go to the east going west. To make a long story short, yes. The Reyes Católicos said yes. How many ships was he able to hire?
3.
What were the names of the ships?
Nina Pinta and Santa Maria.
Nina, right, the girl. The Pinta, what would be the Pinta? the painted one. And the other one was the
Santa Maria.
Santa Maria. You think Columbus was a religious man? We know from his diary he was a religious man. Very religious. Very religious. Not unusual in his age. Very religious man. This has all been romanticized. The fact is, they had trouble from the beginning. There were two brothers who were on this trip. They were the Hermanos Pinzon, and they made trouble the whole time. They made trouble for Columbus until Columbus one day took a man who had broken one of his rules and hung him and said, "Do you see this? Now look, I know this is shocking to you, this wonderful group, this wonderful civilized group, but when you're on a ship with men and you want to make a point, you have to make a point." And he made his point. He said, "You see what happened to him? Who knows what the words were, but the idea was that's what will happen to anyone who tries what he tried again. If anybody tries to take over one of these ships, that's what's going to happen." He had to do it. He laid down the law. Columbus was a tough guy. That's just the way it goes. After they were out for a long time, weeks, and they haven't seen land, the people began to panic. They began to say, "Now we know that this was all wrong. This was a terrible mistake." So he would give them false information. He'd say, "The problem is because of the wind, we didn't travel as much as we expected. So I have," and he tells us this, he would give a report where he said, "We didn't go that far yesterday. We haven't gone that far because of the winds. There's a problem." He'd say, "But eventually we're going to get there." He traveled and he kept going. He kept going. We know this. And where did the ship finally, where did they spot land for the first time? We know it was a place some would call Hispaniola, right? The area that includes the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic is the New World, right? The oldest place, isn't it? Early on, after Columbus has gone back and so on, we have Spanish traveling there, and then soon afterwards, Cuba. Cuba is very important, all of this history. But did Columbus, I know it's a stupid question, but I have to ask it because I guarantee you I would ask it in my class if I were teaching at OU. Did Columbus ever land anywhere, it's a trick question, on any U.S. territory? Who's going to be my person? You go ahead. Any U.S. territory.
I don't think so.
Well, what was the place?
St. Augustine.
No, he actually did not. However, what would be the closest? I heard someone say it.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. In the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, of course, right? Puerto Rico. It is said that the one place on the mainland he finally saw was a place in Venezuela.
Macuro.
There's a story that might not be true. We'll ask our resident Venezolana if it's true or not. There's a story that goes like this. He saw this place and was so moved by it that he named the place La Pequeña Venecia, Venezuela. Is it a true story?
Yes, but that's probably after he touched land.
Yeah.
Because it's in the opposite part of the country.
We
so
don't know if it's true. Some people say it is not true, but it's
But
an old story. It's
it
a
is an old
legend
story.
about Columbus and Venezuela. We do know that was the one place on the mainland that.
Book of Macuro.
Well, let's look at Macuro in Venezuela.
Yes, one name, Macuro.
We knew
is,
We know that Columbus did eventually see Venezuela. He also,
the map is close to Trinidad. If you look for Macuro, the map, and then we'll give you,
Trinidad.
yeah, because
What else what did Columbus see? What was he able, there it is. What was he able to see on his first trip? What did he see that no other European had seen? The obvious answer is native peoples. And it was shocking to him. Native peoples. He said, who are these people? Who are these people? So much so that he took at least 2 Native Americans back with him to show them to the king. He would go when he returned after lots of struggles, after lots of problems, all kinds of problems with the boats and all kinds of problems with the Pinzon brothers. He gets back and they go, they land. Can you imagine a trip like this and he's able to do this? On really, his instruments are fairly simple. His best guide is his instinct as a navigator, and of course, the stars, where he was an absolute master. He goes, he gets back, they get to the mainland, and then he ends up traveling all the way to Barcelona, to a place called El Tineo, all the way to, in Barcelona itself, in the city, there's an old, I'm gonna call it, it's like a big reception hall, but it was probably at one time a palace called the Tineo, and that's where Columbus was able to meet with Fernando, and he actually at that time said, and I have brought something to show you. And he showed him 2 Native Americans. This was shocking, as you can probably imagine. Now, you probably think, well, so suddenly everyone wants to go. It's not that simple. Well, what was Columbus? What do you think? What do you think when he got back? I mean, of course, there's a story of, well, he made this incredible voyage. He brings back things we don't know about, things we haven't seen. But then he starts making demands. Can you imagine anyone doing that? Of course. He says, look, I want to be known for what I've done. I want to get credit for what I've done. And I want to make this, I want this arrangement. I want this promise from you. He said, I want the promise that everything I discover, everything I find that's new, that part of this will belong to me. Part of it will belong to me. And do you think that the Reyes Católicos agreed to that? How many say they think they did? They did. He was promised more than anyone knew could ever be true. He was promised, and later in life, for years, he would over and over and over again, he would insist, but I was promised all these things, and now I have nothing. I was promised all these things. He would say it. He would say it a lot years later. How many voyages did he make? He made 4. And on the last one, he fought with the people who had traveled with him, and they decided that they were going to put him in chains. So we don't want to deal with him anymore. He's out of control, right? We don't want to deal with him anymore. So they had him. He was in chains on the way back, and as they're arriving, as they're getting back to Spain, he's told. By the way, this is a very, very impressive site. I believe it's in Cordoba, where it's Columbus meeting with the Catholic kings. Queen Isabel la Católica, and Fernando el Católico. And so they're arriving and they say, we're gonna take the chains off now because we're back. This has been, weeks. He says, no, I don't want the chains off. I want them to see me in these chains so that they can see how I have been treated. No, I don't want these chains off. I want them to see how you have brought me after all I've done. In a way, it's very revealing. Already on the fourth voyage, he's already. There are lots of people who don't like him, lots of opposition. There are people who are very much against him. And quickly, once travelers, Spanish especially travelers, begin to go to the New World and begin finding things worth money like gold. Quickly, many people want to go. Already by the 1550s, many groups of Spanish on. One of the promises that some of the early explorers have to make before they leave is this. Whatever I should find, I have to bring back and show what I have found, and this all has to be approved and registered by the authorities. Does that make sense? Yes, it has to be approved by authority. That we have thousands and thousands of records of what those ships contained, of all the merchandise. There's a huge archive, one of the largest archives in all of Spain, in Sevilla, which in many ways operates like the capital, functions certainly like the Spanish capital, even if it isn't officially the Spanish capital, it functions like the capital. And there in the records office, they collect thousands and thousands and thousands of documents. And also there are records of ships that never came back. Lots of them. There are all kinds of records it's called the Archivo, the archive, Archivo de Indias, has the records of these travels. Another thing, though, that the Spanish kings insist upon early on, they say, look, if people are going to be going there and building any kind of settlements, we want for there to be religious people with them. We want for there to be friars who will accompany these explorers. We want, if we can, we want to Christianize. It was would have been expected in this age. We want for there to be friars so that from a very early time, you begin to see different, especially Franciscans, some Dominicans, a very famous Dominican named Antonio de Montesinos, which I'll talk about next week. Many of these, early on, there begin to be important voices among the missionaries who accompany, and there a struggle develops between the missionaries and their goals and the people who are on there to seek fortune, to get rich, to go back to Spain, and live the way they never could have imagined. You can imagine this tension. Early on, it starts, and this famous Dominican, Montesinos, is one of the leaders. You have mistreated these people. You have treated them like animals rather than as people. This is wrong. I will not grant absolution to anyone who refuses to repent, and no one will receive communion from me until they have confessed their sins. It's a very, very important episode in the history, early history. That's 1511 when this happens. 1510, 1511. Very, very important. Because sitting there watching this famous sermon given by Antonio Montesinos is a person who will later be named the Apostle of the Indians, Fray Bartolomé de las Casas, a fellow Dominican. Not yet a Dominican when that happened, I should say. Would later become a Dominican and be inspired by Antonio de Montesinos. I'm sorry, our time's up. Thank you very much. Now, yeah, I need to tell you very quickly. When we see the tomb of Columbus, the tomb of Columbus in the cathedral was built to make perfect sense that he was there. Actually, for a time, Columbus was. That was the tomb of Columbus, the tomb we see now. Okay, after the Spanish-American War, the tomb of Columbus, the body was sent back to the Dominican. No, it was sent back first to Cuba. It was sent back to Cuba. That's right. And then later, the Dominican Republic. So that tomb, which you see in that tomb in the Cathedral of Sevilla, which is it once was the tomb of Columbus, but the remains later would be sent to the New World. Muchas gracias. You might want to get a quick if anyone doesn't know who their teacher is, just come up to the front and I'll tell you. Ryan? He's right there. For the beginners, this is Brian. He read to that OU shirt. That's the teacher for the beginners. For the new people tonight, Brian is the teacher for the beginners. Appreciate it.